Welcome to the Get Unhooked podcast with Jason Coombs, where experience meets insight. Jason Coombs, nationally recognized speaker, best-selling author, and founder of Brickhouse Recovery, shares hard-earned lessons on resilience, leadership, addiction, and mental health. No filters, no fluff, just real stories, practical wisdom, and a deeper look at what it takes to grow, lead, and keep moving forward. Now here's your host, Jason Coombs.
Chapter 1, The Hook. Now, this chapter is, if you have not read The Hook lately, take some time to go through The Hook, and I want to ask you to consider a few questions. The questions to ask yourself and to reflect on is, when might this have begun for my addicted loved one? You could trace it back to the early stages and what was happening in their life. You know, think about the genesis of their addiction. When I think about when it begun for me, I can trace it back to, this chapter, The Hook, specifically describes my experience when things began to escalate quickly from what I used to think was dabbling or partying or recreational use or justified use to a full-blown problem. And in the chapters to come, I actually rewind the tape and go back to an experience in high school, the first time I ingested alcohol. And something happened to me when I ingested alcohol for the first time. Something happened to me when I was prescribed very heavy opiates after a car accident in the Hook chapter. What is that? What is that something that happened? And I'm not talking about the external things of what happened, the storyline. Something happened in there that is very important, and that is related to the allergy of the disease. So when someone has an allergy to peanuts, for example, they break out in an abnormal reaction. When someone ingests alcohol or drugs or substances that are mood or mind altering, an individual with the allergy breaks out in abnormal reactions. What are those reactions? I used to say I break out in handcuffs, which is true, but not everybody breaks out in handcuffs when they ingest it. But what does happen is the abnormal reaction that ignites a craving inside me that I want more. And that isn't the same experience when my wife ingests it, for example, after going through surgery and removing her tumors. And, she will discover years later that she had 3/4 of a bottle of opiates left from a surgery years ago. And I'm like, my addict voice says that's drug abuse. Like, not taking those is abusing. It's like someone on the airplane that'll give up half of their glass of wine because we're landing. I'm like, that's alcohol abuse, not drinking that, like, because in my mind, you drink every last drop and then you drink everybody else's that is wasting it. And when it comes to opiates, the same thing. And that is a abnormal reaction, because I love strawberries, but I don't do that with strawberries. Like, if you know what I mean, like if someone leaves half of a strawberry on the stem at the end of a flight, I'm not thinking, why didn't they eat the whole strawberry? Like, maybe I should go get that out of the trash and eat the rest of that. But I do think that way with alcohol, which is very different. And so recognizing some of those things I think is important. Also considering the mental makeup and if there's a diagnosis from a DSM standpoint. And the DSM, I'm referring to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for mental illnesses. Those substance use disorder is found in the DSM. They don't just put things in the DSM that aren't scientifically and medically proven as diagnoses. And so thinking about our loved ones, maybe anxiety disorder, which is something that I had and still have and still treat, but we did not know. And I just talked to my mom about this recently. I mentioned to her that we were reflecting on old times when I was a kid, and some of the reasons why I did the things that I did, and my anxiety came up in the conversation. And I said, man, if I only knew what to do back then, it would have saved me so many years of, I think, searching for solution, which ended up being self-medication. And she said, well, why didn't you tell me? I was like, honestly, that's such a good question. Had I understood what I was experiencing, I think I would have. If I would have understood that my experience of living on this planet as a mortal person was different than what someone that didn't have anxiety was experiencing, I think I would have said, hey, wait, I think there's something different here, because I always just jump to the conclusion that something's wrong with me, not that I had a condition that could be diagnosed and treated. It was like something at the core is wrong with me. And that was as far as it went. And I did tell my mom that. I did say, I think, when she would ask, why did you do that? Like whether it was popping off in class or, getting a rush by stealing something from the candy store or whatever, why did you do that? I guess I'm just a bad kid. That was, I just deduced it to that. And that narrative played, I'm just a bad kid. I'm the black sheep. That was the narrative that I carried my whole life. I'm just the black sheep. All my brothers are getting good grades. So is my sister. I'm just the black sheep. They're not getting in trouble. I am. I'm just the black sheep. And I think we're all black sheep because we're all divinely unique. I think we're all beautiful in our own ways. And who knew that my ADHD and my anxiety disorders would be my superpowers? But it is true that when you have mental diagnoses of ADHD and anxiety disorder and moderate depression or general depression, that oftentimes does have side effects of self-medicating and the likelihood of having an abnormal reaction is higher. It just is. And a big part of that is because the dopamine starts flowing when you ingest the chemicals, whereas before the cortisol is running the show. And so the dopamine settles that cortisol and elevates the epinephrine. And so you feel good, and then you start using with people, and then your oxytocin and serotonin starts flowing, especially if you're using, in the nature or something. Then you start getting all the chemical flows. Whereas before, untreated, you're running a red line of cortisol. And it's difficult experience. It's a difficult experience to live that way. And so when you think through these lenses, my hope is that maybe you don't necessarily have to get to a very specific point in time where it's like, oh, this all makes sense to me now. I hope it doesn't make sense to a point, because what the bigger question is if it doesn't make sense, but enough sense that you can understand that this is a disease that doesn't make sense. This is a predictably unpredictable disease, that there's empathy and some understanding and some compassion when our loved ones' symptoms flare up in dishonesty or behaviors that are unbecoming of them, when they change and then unrecognizable, not the person that you know and love. There's some other version of themselves. Begin to see that this is similar to how chemotherapy changes a person. Like, this disease of cancer is changing my wife, and the chemo is too. The good news is the symptoms aren't similar to addiction, but the reality is disease changes a person, and it changes a family system. And so we can have empathy for understanding that there is a separation between the disease and my loved one. And that separation is very important to embrace, so that you can make decisions from that perspective, and recognizing, like, how, when did this begin for your loved one? What was happening in their life? And then doing some self-reflection. When did this begin for you? So when did you become hooked? And I'm not talking about hooked to substances. I'm talking about hooked to the alternative of the way that you wanted to live your life, and hooked to a version of yourself that found yourself in fear, that resulted in control, that resulted in resentment, that resulted in confusion, that resulted in enabling and rescuing and getting lost or sucked into the water and getting drowned by the tide as the tsunami's building, like getting sucked off the beach into that undertow. When did this begin for you? And how did you feel when this happened? And how did this impact you when you saw your loved one in this stage, in those early days? And what behaviors changed in your life? What did you start doing or stop doing? And I think a bigger question is, what did you start neglecting in your life? So this chapter in the Hook is purposefully placed in the beginning to ask yourself these questions as you're reading the narrative of my experience. And as you're living through my experience, you're identifying your own through your loved one's experience, and then attaching to, I changed as well along the journey. Maybe it wasn't at that time. Maybe at that time, like, my parents didn't change at the time that I was beginning to go through the doctor shopping stuff and the OxyContin drug ring. Because they didn't know about it, but they did know that I was struggling to pay my bills. And they did know that they needed to help me more often with that. They did know that my affect was changing. They did know that I was losing weight. They did know that I was becoming less and less reliable, keeping to my word. They did know that I wasn't being as honest. They did know something was off. So when they were in that space, what were some of the things that they did? What are some of the things that they started neglecting as they hyper-focused on trying to figure out what was right, real or wrong or right or indifferent? They had no idea substances were a part of the equation. And so this gets down to causes and conditions. Underneath the symptom of substance use, we get down to causes and conditions. What are those causes and conditions for you? And that's some good reflection time. So take some time to write on that, and then to go into those places and spend some time meditating. This is just an awareness process. This isn't put some goals around it and start taking action. No, this is about just going a little bit deeper than you have before in contemplating some of these seasons of your past and your loved ones' past, so that you're able to begin the process of healing that and reconciling some of that through a different lens, through a lens of the disease model, through the lens of empathy, which is to be in feeling with. Compassion means to suffer with. And when you have empathy and compassion, you have a much higher ability to influence. So that is the suggestion. Take the suggestion, and I'm excited to learn about and hear about and see what you gain through this process. I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this show. Thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing these episodes so that they can help others. This is one way that you can give back and pay it forward, is by just passing along this free information to others that are possibly in need. Share it on social media. Share it with your loved ones and family members. And don't forget, you can access my book on Audible, as well as on Amazon or on my website. As well as you can find information about our services at Brickhouse Recovery at brickhouserecovery.com.